Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Uncorked with Funny Wine Girl. This is Funny Wine Girl, aka Janine Luby, and I'm back in my quote unquote, we'll call it studio, my living room. Last week I was on the road, which was unusual, but I wanted to get a tour of a new building, a relatively new building on Johnson College's campus, and Dr. Katie Leonard, who is the president, was on the podcast. It'll be almost 2 years. Well, it'll be 2 years, I should say, in August. And so I wanted to catch up with her and I love this idea of talking to people in person. I think that's great. But doing it on Zoom also allows more flexibility. And I get to talk to women all over the country and even the world. But this week, I'm excited to speak with someone who is here in Northeastern Pennsylvania, Maria Conigliaro, who I've heard so many good things about. You heard me mention a few weeks ago when I was talking to my guest, Chelsea Manganero. She was another woman who I had heard about in Northeastern Pennsylvania, but who I had never met in person. So this is another case of I've seen Maria speak at the Empower conference that the Scranton Chamber does a few years ago. Loved what she had to say. And again, as I've said, many people have sung her praises. Megan Alpert, who I had on the podcast, my friend Pat O'Brien. So, it's wonderful. It's funny in Scranton, my mother will say, pardon my French, you can't shit in Scranton because everybody knows everybody in Northeast PA. But that can be a great thing because we build, I think, great community and connection. So without further ado, because I always say every week how I like to explain how I know my guest. And so this is really a case of Maria being out there, doing a great job of being out there and having a great reputation. And that's how I had heard of Maria. So without further ado, now I will introduce my guest for this week, Maria Conigliaro. And am I saying that right?
A lot of people say Conigliaro. My immediate family says Conigliaro, but both are fair. I'll take both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much for this
Conigliaro.
opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. As I said, it was funny. I've seen you from afar because I've seen you speak and I've seen you at different chamber events where we've networked, but never had the opportunity to actually chat with you. And as I said before I hit the record button, I think what you do is so different and interesting that I think it's going to make for a great conversation. But before we dive into that, could you share? I know you're a fourth generation small business owner and you're from this region. Tell us a little bit, just a little background, something that you'd want to share about yourself.
Sure. So I did grow up in New Milford, which is about 45 minutes north of Scranton. My parents were third generation in a family restaurant that was opened in 1928 by my great
Wow.
grandfather. So I grew up in that environment of small business, of really not knowing the difference between work and life because it was all meshed together. And then I launched my own graphic design and marketing agency in 2012. And that just took off. And I really, really loved it. Um, and then always being interested in psychology, consumer behavior, marketing, brand design, getting to know someone on a deep, deep level. I became obsessed with mindset and personal development as an entrepreneur. And that led me to become a certified neuro coach so that I could help other business leaders manage their mindset, push through procrastination, self sabotage, and get to their next level. Because I've worked with entrepreneurs and CEOs for more than a decade in my marketing agency, in my life, really.
Wow. And before we get into all of that, so you grew up with this idea of business, you said, and life meshing, which
Yeah.
in one way I know, and it's interesting. A few weeks ago when I had Chelsea Manganero on here, she's like, it is her life. Like there's no like real separation, but she enjoys and she's passionate about what she does. But you're also a mom of two daughters, right? So
Mhm.
I would imagine, and now I don't have children, so I don't have that role or that part of myself, but you've got to learn, I guess, at some part to separate that, right? So at some point, I should say, because you don't want to bring the business into everything. So has that helped as you
Um,
work with other business owners, or do you find it's not necessary to separate them?
I have an interesting take, I think, in that I feel as though the individual is at the center core of their entire life. When you go to work, you don't turn off being a mom. So, how could you turn off being a business owner when you're feeding your kids dinner? I think that we are at the center of every area of our lives and they're all intertwined. And when we try to divide it, when we try to separate it, that's when we create more resistance in our lives than is really necessary. Uh, on the contrary, I will say prioritizing when you're in the moment is also very important. So I don't think it's a matter of turning off a part of ourselves and turning one back on, but more prioritizing what you're doing in the moment.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense. And I think it's something like someone who hasn't owned a business or someone who does, and this is not a judgment. It's just, I mean, for years I worked at Blue Cross of Northeastern Pennsylvania for 11 years, so I could turn it off because I wasn't, high executive management. I had a job, and when I
Mhm.
came home, it was okay. But now I know for myself, having Laugh to Live my business, independent contract work as a marketing communication specialist, it really doesn't, you're right, it doesn't get turned off, and doing like this podcast and stand-up comedy, so it can be extra challenging, but also you're right not to fight it because it is who I
Yeah.
am. I am my business. And I mean, I think like you said, prioritizing and probably some boundaries, because I find like,
Yes.
laying in bed looking at emails at 10 o'clock is not the way to do it. Of course, as I'm learning more about my perimenopause and getting good sleep, you're not supposed to be looking at your phone in bed anyway. But that prioritizing, like you said, and setting boundaries is, I think,
Mhm.
probably what we need to do more of, maybe.
Absolutely. It's a matter of awareness. I think awareness is at the very beginning of all things. So when it comes to setting boundaries, prioritizing, saying this is the moment that I'm in, controlling what we can control, being where our feet are, all of those things I think begin with awareness. And we're not naturally wired to have that awareness most of the time. We're naturally wired to be on autopilot because our brain is conserving energy.
Hmm. I joke with my close friends, like, I've got awareness. It's then what I do with it. Sometimes I wish I didn't have
Yeah.
awareness and I was like, do I'm not aware of, that I'm a procrastinator. I'm aware.
It's selective awareness.
Uh-huh. It's just, what do
Yeah,
I do about it? And if I do nothing, then it's like more tormenting for myself.
yeah,
Well, I'd
yeah,
I'd like to talk a little bit about, so you are in graphic now, you still do the design work as well.
I do.
Um, and you're doing neuro coaching. I think it's fascinating. I'm a creative type, so I am not a graphic designer, but I'm familiar from working with designers, and I just think it's the coolest thing. And I read on your website, so it seems to make sense, the two together, but sometimes you wouldn't necessarily think of graphic design and neuro coaching. So, and I want
Yeah,
people to understand, and I want to understand better what neuro coaching is. So, why don't you tell me a little bit about what led you to it? And then if you could explain, to us what that is, what that means.
absolutely. There is a correlation, but at first glance, it doesn't seem that obvious. Um, so what led me to it was being an entrepreneur. That is personal development 101, is it not? Have you experienced it? Really, it pushes
Yeah.
us to create boundaries when we're not comfortable with boundaries, or to push ourselves outside of our comfort zone daily, to be creative with problem solving multiple times a day. You don't know what kind of problem you're bumping up against. Um, so being an entrepreneur definitely pushed me onto the path of personal development. And it got to a point where I found myself honestly depressed. I had built a successful business. I had a fabulous team member who was working with me. I loved all of my clients. I had 2 kids in 2 years. I was happily married. Life was perfect on paper, but somehow I found myself extremely depressed after my second daughter was born. And because I had been on this personal development journey, I was listening to a podcast, and it was a doctor of neuropsychology who said, "A thought always precedes an emotion." And that really, really stuck with me one day when I was in my lowest of lows. And I thought to myself, well, what is the thought that is making me feel so depressed right now? There must be a thought behind this. So that in that moment was a shift for me. And that's when I really dove into neuro coaching and neuroscience because of that interview that I'd overheard. And that's what led me down the path to get certified so that I could understand how my brain was wired, what my subconscious beliefs were, so that I could rewire them and they weren't controlling me on autopilot, so that the emotions weren't the first thing I noticed. Because if a thought always comes first, thoughts we can control. Emotions we can't necessarily control, and we don't always have to. Um, but that was the shifting point for me. And through my neuro coaching program, I was practicing with a friend, and she was asking me the specific questions that we were learning how to ask. And one of my answers was, because I don't matter, it's not about me. And she said, Maria, did you hear what you just said? I said, of course, it's not about me. It's about my clients. It's about my kids. It's about my husband. Like, really, this has nothing to do with me. And she said, but Maria, where else does that show up in your life? I don't matter. It's not about me. And in that moment, things just started clicking. My whole life flashed before my eyes. And I realized that I had been giving, thinking that was a badge of honor, thinking that made me selfless, thinking that made me a good person, someone who's providing value to my clients, not expecting anything in return. Um, but it went too far. It was in an unhealthy state. And that's what drove me to be depressed. I mean, 2 kids in 2 years, I was literally giving from my body over and over and over, and my mind and my energy and my thoughts and everything. Um, so it was in that moment that I decided I'm turning it around. I'm absolutely 100% turning it around.
So the neuro coaching, taking that, it helped
Yeah.
you first, obviously,
Yes.
before you could, which truly makes full sense
Yeah.
because you experience it, you know the benefits. Now, knowing that it's helped you, you know, you can recognize how to help others. And would you say that that's a common, and I know you know, I want to uplift women every week on this podcast. So my focus is usually women. Would you say, and I only because I've seen it with other women, women tend to do that a lot where it's like
Yeah.
it's not, it's more of a service type of thing. Like you said, like I serve, I take care of, I'm a caregiver. And then leaving behind this idea of, well, what do I want? What do I need? I think women tend to do that a lot.
Absolutely. I do. I think it's just society, it's culture, it's how we were raised. Our brain is collecting data since honestly 3 weeks of gestational period. That's when our brain is starting to collect data from the outside world. And
Wow.
yeah, so whatever we were raised with, whatever kind of society, family, events that happened, all of those things are getting hardwired at a very young age. And so we just continue that because that's how our brain is naturally wired. And, you know, but I think the world is shifting. I think people are talking more about this. I think it's a good thing. And I think women are turning a corner and really are taking more care of themselves.
Yeah. And thanks to people like you and others out there, I mean, we are hearing much more positive messages and resources and
Yeah,
opportunities to address these things. It's interesting that you said the thought, you know, comes before the emotion. I mean, that's something I freely talk about it because I think women need to. I'm 52 and I'm, you know, experiencing perimenopause and I never had like a diagnosis of depression, but I get depressed with this, with the hormones at different times. And granted, it could just be the hormones, but sometimes it can really affect how I feel about myself. And like, you know,
absolutely.
I do this laughter yoga and I might have had 10 women say, oh, that felt really good. Thank you. And everything. But then sitting in the darkness, I'm like, what am I doing? I have nothing to give and no one cares about what I'm doing. It doesn't matter. And when you listen to that or you tell yourself that, that can get really dangerous.
It can be very dangerous. Again, with the awareness, that is so sneaky. And the most dangerous part is that there's part of it that could actually potentially be true. We can convince ourselves that part of it might be true, and that's when it's the most powerful. And if we're not aware, then we don't have the choice to choose the actual truth or the truth that is going to help you live at your highest and best. Because that certainly will not. No one cares. What am I doing this for? That's not living at your highest and best. And that's not light and love and positivity and joy and expansion, right? That's more contraction, ego, stay small. Who do you think you are? Unworthiness, right? We
Yeah,
get to choose.
absolutely. Yeah. Well, and that's, I think a lot of us forget that. We may not forget it, but like in that moment, it's hard to,
That moment.
to see it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we get so close to it.
Yeah. And it becomes, I mean, sometimes I feel like, I know I'll speak for myself and say like wallowing is almost easier because and I don't know why that is. It's just more comfortable in a way because it's like, for myself, sometimes to wallow it's easier because to be bigger, to
Mhm.
accomplish more takes more, right? You need
Yes.
to like, yes, I can do it, but it's going to take a lot of work, or it's going to take perseverance and grit and keep going. And it's easier some days to just, curl up and be small and go, I'm not going to do it. I can't do it.
I think it's balance. We all have those moments, and that's okay. And I don't think we should necessarily be hard on ourselves. We can't be positive and joyful and upbeat all the time. Without that contrast, we don't know what positive is, right?
True.
Um, but you said, I don't know why that is. Our brains have something called negativity bias, where negative things are 9 times more powerful than positive things. And that is a safety mechanism that keeps us from going outside of what it knows to be familiar. Anything that's not familiar is not safe. So when we're in that space, our brain is like, cool, comfortable. It's the devil we know. And so that is why it's easier, because it's hardwired. It's not taking energy. But I think to your point about women and uplifting women and supporting people in our community, that's when we get to reach out and say, hey, can you help me? Can you help me get through this? This is going on in my mind, and I know it's not true. Can you help me see another perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I don't know if I heard it in your presentation or maybe in yours and in others, that like that's, and I could be wrong, so you can correct me if I'm wrong here, like this idea, like that's so old, it's like back with caveman times because of what we needed to protect ourselves from, like,
Like,
when they were afraid of whatever types of animals, or were, the hunting and other people they didn't know. And it was just a different, that like that was just meant really to protect ourselves. So
yes.
the intent or the purpose was good, but now it doesn't serve us all the time.
Right. The fear then was life-threatening, animals. Now it's just an idea that our brain perceives to be life-threatening. And because it wants to conserve energy in case we have to run away from a dangerous animal, our hungriest organ automates so many things so that it's not taking energy to think. It's our hungriest organ.
Wow. That is so interesting. I want to get into how you help clients, but let me ask you here, and I don't want to get into not so much about not politics, but like how social media, you said the negativity bias. Is that why so many people devour you see a lot of negativity being used in campaigns and
Mhm.
just news, like clickbait, as we say. Like, so is that why it's so popular? Because that's what our brain is kind of used to, or just happens so easily, that negativity.
Yeah, fear. I mean, it's all fear-based, and it makes us look inside and be afraid of things, and that keeps us from taking action, is that fear.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
when people don't take action, then in like, in certain countries, if it is political, whatever, it could be easier to control people if they're not going to take action, right?
Yeah, that's a whole other tangent. I'm not really comfortable sharing my personal
Yeah.
opinions
Yeah. No, no.
on, but yeah,
Absolutely.
it's fear is incredibly, incredibly powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, it
Yeah.
definitely is. It's an emotion. And again, kind of what you just said about like back in caveman times, fear could save your life, but I think fear can also it can lead to things that are really not good and unhealthy because you're,
Mhm.
living in fear, you're afraid of things, then you won't step out, like you said, step
So,
outside your comfort zone. You won't push beyond what you think you're capable of. Yeah.
yeah, and it's not always big things. It can be as small as procrastinating or having a really long to-do list, or um, staying up too late so you don't get enough sleep, so you don't have enough energy the next day. That's just that's just your brain doing everything it can to keep you from pursuing the things that are on the other side of what you want. And we all desire things that are outside of what we have, right? That's the point of having a desire. We don't have it yet.
Yeah.
But our brain is saying, no, we don't know what that looks like. So it's dangerous to our primal brain. And that's where neuro coaching comes in, because there's 3 stages that I use with neuro coaching. And the first one is to dive into the subconscious mind using a series of questions to see what is that automatic programming? What is your sentence that you are believing about yourself that is intertwined in every area of your life? And I call it your golden thread because it can be the thing that pushes you to do good in the world, right? To give value. Your I don't matter, it's not about me. There's good things about that, but there's also things that really can hold you back. Um, so what I like to do is first we dive into the subconscious mind, see what your golden thread is. Then in the second phase, we start to rewire it. And we start to rewire it by refuting it. And that's where the creativity piece comes in. That's where my decades of thinking outside of the box and being creative and connecting different dots and taking different ideas and different strategies and applying it to different areas comes in really handy because I'm able to, from an outsider's perspective, help you see beyond yourself, right? We're too close to it. So that's where I can come in and say, okay, where do you want to go? Okay, what's a healthy, positive way of thinking about yourself? What can you believe about yourself? What can you believe about money? What can you believe about health? What can you believe about love? What can you believe about success and failure that is going to tell your brain that it already has experienced these things? Help your brain become familiar with the unfamiliar before you even take action. And then the third phase, we start to rewire it using audio and we create productivity plans. So we're putting into action using micro celebrations and micro wins, because we don't want to make too much change too quickly. We retrain your brain through actions. And then by the end of it, your brain is newly hardwired. We break down the old, literally, like the synaptic gap becomes so big that that ball of energy that's a thought can't jump it anymore. So it jumps down these new neural pathways, creates a new emotional response, creates a new belief system, and then we just naturally take action and become the kind of person that we wanted to be all along.
Wow. And as I read on your website and you're explaining it, kind of makes sense. You do a lot of branding. And so I'm
Mhm.
sure when you were helping, whether it's, a company or an individual brand, you had to get to know them, right? You had to get to know their services, what they offer, what sets them apart from other people and other businesses. So that you're already used to doing. And so
Yes,
now, I mean, it's similar. You really have to dive in there, as you said, and get to
yes.
know and let people open up and share what's going on.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love people. I love people, and I love getting to know what makes them tick, what makes them feel so passionate, what makes them so inspired to be out in the world doing something that is scary, that is pushing boundaries, that is bigger than other people have thought about before. They're just connecting with people like that is just so inspiring to me. It's amazing. It's amazing how everyone could be so similar, but also so individual.
Yeah. That and you know what? I will say we need more people like you in the world, honestly, because I feel like we're getting often feels like disconnected. So I think the connection part is key. So that kind of take on life and positiveness about connecting is just I think it's so needed. I think we need to do more of that because then we see our differences less, I feel, and we can, just connect and help one another more, which I think is so important. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think entrepreneurs themselves, especially solopreneurs, we're so used to feeling like we have to do it on our own because that's how we started. We started with a passion, we started with a skill set or a talent, something that really brought us joy. We do it a lot, we love it, we give, and then we're like, they can't really do it as well as me. I'm just going to do it. Or it's too hard to explain what I want. I'm just going to do it anyway. Right? So the more successful we become, sometimes the more lonely we become. And that's another reason why I really love this, because I'm able to support people who are in that lonely moment and just be a safe space for personal, professional, and health, any kind of area of their lives where they just feel like they're not, it's pulling them down in other areas. So being that support system it just lights me up.
So would you say, and I'm going to ask this just as like, as a naysayer who might be like, neuro
Yes.
coaching,
Yes.
there's so many, so there are therapists out there, and you're not pretending or saying you're a therapist. How, and there's a lot of different coaching out there. So if someone was looking at this and going, okay, you did graphic design, you have neuro coaching, it's hard. For some people, it might be hard to wrap their head around it. Why would I seek your help versus something else? Like, you're not pretending to be a therapist. If you feel you need
Right.
therapy, that's separate, right?
That's totally
But
separate. That's like,
yeah,
I even asked my therapist, uh, because I told her, I said, I don't wanna there's a boundary here that I don't wanna cross. I don't wanna be unprofessional. And she said, there's a baseline. And I loved how she put it. There's a baseline. Anything below baseline is therapy. Anything above baseline is coaching. And you can do both simultaneously. It's certainly possible. Um,
okay,
but why choose me? I would say if you're feeling like you are self-sabotaging, if you feel like you have had this desire and this goal for a long time and you've been trying to achieve it and you feel like you've been doing everything you possibly can and like, why isn't it working? Maybe it's just not meant for me. My guess is that it's something inside of you. It's a belief inside of you that is blocking it. So it's not an outside external thing, it's an internal thing. And when you're ready to go in and remove it and change it and finally get where you've been trying to go, that's a perfect sweet spot for me. Also, the other place is change. If you're in a place in your life or business of dramatic change, it either came about because you wanted it to, or it came about unexpectedly. It could be a divorce. It could be you're trying to sell your company. It could be you're trying to hire your first employee. It could be a health journey. Um, the brain doesn't like change. So if you want to move through and navigate this journey of change a little bit easier with a little bit less resistance, a little bit more strategy, don't fight it. Let's flow with it. Let's use the way your brain is naturally wired. Let's help you through this time. That's another perfect opportunity for neuro coaching.
yeah, and that makes sense. And I love what you said about the baseline too, and about you can do both, because I've often wondered, I meet a lot of different people in different types of coaching, lifestyle coaching, and different things. And it's like, when do people know? And I think you're making a really good point. Like, like a therapist is one thing, but you can also then work with a coach too to help you make these changes that are so important. And maybe even, I know for myself, a lot of times accountability is something that's important. And it's funny, years ago, I'm going to admit to watching garbage on TV, Real Housewives,
Uh-huh.
where I think it was John Cougar Mellencamp's daughter was an accountability coach. And I'm like, what the heck is that? But yet I see the value in it, because honestly, unfortunately, I don't show up for myself all the time. So, like getting up early to run or walk or whatever, it is so much easier for me personally if I have someone that I have to meet. And I
Yeah,
say have to because I like to be a person of my word. So, I want to be there for them, even though I know at the end, I'll feel wonderful too after having taken a 50-minute walk or a run or
absolutely.
whatever. But it's that accountability. And I think that comes with probably no matter who you go to coach with. If you're
Absolutely.
having these sessions, you want to be accountable and have this person, truly help you if you're putting in the time and the investment.
Absolutely. Yeah, accountability is incredibly important. And if you know that about yourself, then you can take the action steps, like you said, to bring in an accountability partner. It doesn't have to be someone you pay for every time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's true. That's where you mentioned before, women helping one another and supporting one another. That's a form of help and support. If someone's available in the morning and they like to walk too, it's like, hey, can we start doing this together? Because I personally, I need this. I mean, and
Mhm.
I've done it. I've run 2 marathons, and I've done a lot of my long runs by myself. So I know I can do that, but it's not always easy. So having that person, I know I find it's like, well, then I'm letting two people down. I'm letting myself and that other person. So for me, it has worked to have other people to meet. But I think, like you said, you don't have to have a coach for that you pay all the time, but
Right.
having friends and knowing who you can rely on and support, and then being there for them or other people when they need it too. It's reciprocal.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of women, especially, we're afraid to ask for help. We feel like we're letting the other person down or we're in inconvenience. But how do you feel when someone asks you for help? You feel good. You feel like, wow, I have this thing or this time or this skill that can benefit somebody else. And it feels really good to give that. So by trying to do everything yourself and by not asking, you're actually taking that away from someone else who could experience that gift of giving.
Yeah. And that's absolutely true. You're right. I know for myself, if someone, I'm never like, I never feel it's an imposition. If anyone asks for any,
Never.
advice or like, oh, hey, what did you do when you start your podcast? Or what did you, I'm more than happy. Like, I'm the type that's like, okay, well, let me tell you, I
Yeah.
mean, and I think we
Yeah.
do tend to forget though, that like, we do feel, I know I often feel that way too. Like, oh, I don't want to bother them. I know they're
Right.
busy enough. I don't want to put something else on their plate. But I think you're right. People are more than likely like to offer their help and say
Mhm.
what they did to help you do something
Yeah.
similar. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. And then reciprocity, of course. You return the favor in another way sometimes.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah. And it might not be right away, but maybe the
No,
next year it's like, okay, so yeah, I could use your help now. Yeah,
absolutely.
absolutely.
Hmm.
I think that's great. And I think it's important. That's why I think with this, I say every week how I know my guests, because I think and it's a reminder for myself too, like with networking and the word networking, it could be a different, just being a good human. I like to say, just being curious, getting to know people and having this network or connectivity of people that you can rely on and reach out when you need something, or that they can do the same for you. And I think that's great to be able to show up for people like that and know that you have folks that you can reach out to who will show up for you as well.
Yes. And that ties back into what you said before about integrity. You like to do what you say you're gonna do. Um, and when you're in a room of like-minded people, anything is possible. Like we all just rise like a tide together when that's happening.
Yeah. What would you say, as I start to wrap up now, what would you say is the most rewarding part for you, or how have you felt through these years of doing this neuro coaching? Clearly, as you said, you like people, so you're enjoying this, and I can only imagine how great you feel when someone says to you, you know what, you've helped me launch my business, or you've helped me, transition in this part of my life that was so challenging. If you could just describe that for you, for like what you feel or how you feel about this.
It is like a mother's pride. It really is. And I don't really know how else to describe it. When my clients are, going through a divorce and their business is suffering, and then you see them on the other side and they're in a happy, healthy relationship and their business is soaring and they're shining and they're just their biggest, brightest, most vibrant version of themselves. It's that's what we're all here for, you know? It's so much pride. Yeah.
Yeah. And you can tell from the testimonials on your website, the results that are happening with the people that you work with. So that's fantastic. And, the more bright lights there are out there, the better for all of us. So I think that's great. Is there anything else that you would want people to understand or to know that we just didn't talk about?
Um, I love to tell people not to be too hard on themselves. Your brain is just doing what your brain is wired to do. You haven't done anything wrong. You're not doing anything wrong. Take that pressure off of yourself. And if you are in a place where you're like, yeah, I'm ready to shift my perspective, it's nothing more than a choice. And you can look back and say, okay, what is hardwired? Again, not my fault. We can look at it very objectively and say, okay, is this serving me? Is it not serving me? And then choose moving forward.
Yeah. That's great advice. It reminds me a little bit of what Megan Alpert had said. Well, and what she still says to me. I go to her now for my investments, and it's like, I'll start off by saying, oh, I'm not good with money, or I don't do this, I don't do that. And she's like, that's your old story. And it's along
She's
those lines and not
very good
judging
about that.
myself. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a good reminder though, like you said, don't blame yourself. Because I mean, if we
Mm.
could spend all that time blaming, then how are we going to move forward? But I will say working with her and this idea of positive manifestations has helped me. And even though I also want to refer back to something you said earlier about small change, I think it can change is hard, as you said. So to leap into something big, it can turn a lot of people off. Like for myself, I'll speak for myself. Small steps, often I have to do it little by little. And with the, even using the example of my investments and money, getting me even to shift the way I'm thinking, for me, that feels like a huge win because I wasn't even thinking about my money before. And when I refer back to it, Megan will smile and say, "That's your old story." So I want to stay and looking forward. And I love, that's kind of like what you're saying too. Like, don't judge yourself, don't be harsh.
Mm-mm. No, it is. Sometimes you have to slow down to speed up because if you try and speed, then you're going to stop altogether. But if you take baby micro steps, just like investing, it's compound interest. And over time, you're going to get further faster if you just slow down.
Yeah. I love that. And that's akin to I don't run as much the same distance or the speed as I used to, and I was never fast. But I remember a gentleman who was helping me when I was just doing training for a 5 miler, and he left me an encouraging note on my desk. That was back when I worked at Blue Cross, and it said, "Slow and steady wins the race."
Right.
And I love that. It's funny when I do races. I love to see little kids because they don't have control yet. Right. They don't know. Like they'll speed up, and then they go, they stop right in front of you because they run out of gas. But
Yeah.
I think I'd like to believe that as we get older and more mature, we learn more self-control, and we learn like the things that you're saying, like to really look at the long, haul, and how it is to make the little changes so that we can get to the places we really want to get to.
Yes, absolutely. I love
Yeah.
that.
Well, I want to thank you so much for your time today, Maria. How can, or what would you say, what's the best way for folks who are listening going? Because I can't imagine anyone hearing this and not thinking, wow, that's really interesting. I want to learn more. Would you want to refer them to your website, or where can they reach out to you to maybe even set up a call or something like that?
Absolutely. So my website is mariaconigliaro.com and you can set up a call on the website. That's probably the best way is just let's talk it out. Let's see if this is a fit for you. I am not a high pressure salesman. I really want people to want it. And then if you just want to follow me on social media or join my newsletter, that's also a great way just to get to know more about what I do and how it might benefit you because, timing is important too. So I'm on Instagram at Neuro Coach Maria, Facebook at Neuro Coach Maria, and then on LinkedIn as myself, Maria Conigliaro.
Okay, great. And I will put a link to your website in the show notes for this podcast so people can
Thank
definitely
you.
check it out. Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
want to thank you so much for your time, Maria. This has been so interesting for me just to talk to you.
This was so much fun. Thank you.
Thank you again. And so for my listeners, I hope you definitely, hey, I learned a heck of a lot. Hopefully you did too. And check out Maria's website, follow her on social media. And even if you're, as Maria said, great point, timing is everything. So maybe you just want to learn right now, gather information, and you're not quite ready, but definitely learn a little bit more about it to see what it's all about and what Maria is doing to help people. And as always, I want to thank you for listening. I'm excited about, I'm in the works of planning the next several weeks. I'm going to have Michelle from Electric City Suites. We'll be talking. She's someone who worked in New York City years ago for Dylan Candy. I think it was Ralph Lauren's daughter that had that, but we were talking at the Empower conference recently. And in fact, she's related to a couple of my other previous guests, Jenna Urban and Tara. Oh my gosh, I knew how to say her name, Machiaco. I'm messing it up, but she's the basketball coach, and we had a fantastic conversation. So Michelle will be scheduled in the weeks ahead, and I have a couple other folks that I have not secured yet, so I won't say. But I'm excited about the conversations, and be sure to check out the show notes to learn more about Maria and ways that you can help if you'd like to continue seeing this content on this weekly podcast. I am so thrilled and proud to have Emily Hickox as a sponsor, Budget Through Life, helping people one on one and in group classes. So if you're interested in being a sponsor of this podcast or making a donation, just reach out to me. That would be fantastic to help keeping this podcast going. But as I always say, even if you want to just share a post, tell someone that, hey, you should check out this podcast. That has great value as well. So, as I always say, I appreciate you from the bottom of my heart and the bottom of my wine glass.